Hawkworth. He and his wife have visited all of the presidential libraries, and right now I didn't realize Gerald Ford had a presidential library.
Oh, you didn't?
Well, actually I did, because
Okay.
I've read your book, but I mean, but the fact is, it seems like he is, I mean, I know less about him probably than any president since I'm born.
Well, I hope I can correct that.
Okay.
Today,
I hope
right.
he did some good things, Len.
He did. Last time, of course, we ended up talking about Richard Nixon.
Right.
And I assume you would think I would start with Gerald Ford today, but I'm going to talk about a man by the name of Leslie Lynch King, Jr.
Now, okay.
He was born in Omaha, Nebraska in July 1913.
I know what we're doing.
Okay.
I have read the history.
All right. His mother was a 19-year-old college student who then married a man by the name of King Jr., King Sr., excuse me, and he was apparently very abusive, and so she moved back to her home in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And there in an Episcopal church, she met a man by the name of Gerald Ford Sr. And so he married her, even though she was divorced and had a child, which was kind of, not part of the standard of Grand Rapids in those days. Okay, he never adopted him, but he did legally change his name to Gerald Ford Jr. And apparently he had a very good upbringing.
Gerald Ford Jr. changed his name to his own name.
Yes.
Okay.
His name was actually Leslie King.
Right.
Okay.
But he himself changed it.
That's right. And then they legally changed it, but he never was adopted by his new father. He was a paint salesman in Grand Rapids, and apparently not that well-to-do, but apparently a very down-to-earth type of a guy. Then sometime later, when Gerald Ford was about 12 or 13, they told him about his biological father. And a few years later, while he was working flipping hamburgers in a hamburger joint, his biological father showed up from Wyoming, telling him that he came to Grand Rapids because he was picking up a new car and was kind of flaunting his wealth. And Gerald Ford was very disappointed about this because of his father taking that long to ever make contact with him. But his biological father, asked whether or not he would like to come and live with him because he had all the financial means and so on. But Gerald Ford had already been very much impressed with his new father because of his values and so on. So he said, no way. Apparently, Gerald Ford was a very uncomplicated teenager, a typical teenager, very straight arrow. He was a Boy Scout, became an Eagle Scout. He was a football star, and he was more interested in cars than he was in girls. I think what we ought to do is see some pictures now at this point about his presidential library. Gerald Ford's library is different from all of the other presidential libraries in that it's located in two different sites. All the others are on one site. We start, first of all, and we'll go to the next picture here, in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Gerald Ford went to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and so his actual library, where all of his papers are located, are in Ann Arbor. And then his museum part is in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Well, that's the next picture, I think. No, that's still in Ann Arbor. Let's go on to the next one. His museum in Grand Rapids is very interesting. It's well done, and you can tell that the people of Grand Rapids were very, very proud of Gerald Ford. Always were, still are, by the way. All right, next one. A picture of Gerald Ford, Boy Scout. They made a big emphasis about that he was a straight type of a guy and so on. Okay, there he is as a Eagle Scout. And they said that that's what the country needed after Richard Nixon, a Boy Scout, an Eagle Scout. And I think they were right. Okay. I think we had, all right. This is a plaque right outside of the museum. And we'll see another one, I think. In the household, it talks about the fact that he was brought up, in a very fine middle-class family. And one of the emphasis that they were making, I think it says that on there, he says the motto was always tell the truth, work hard, and come to dinner on time. And that's what it's stated there. He was very pleased with his family. His family brought him up very nicely and so on. Okay, anything else there? We have one more plaque here, which I can't read from here, and I trust you can on your screen at home. All right.
What is it? What's the title of it? He wrote that himself. Yeah. Oh, that's a saying that he wrote.
It's a saying, yeah. Okay. All right. So much for the pictures. I think we remember the trademark of Gerald Ford. He had his pipe. He was a football player at the University of Michigan, and afterwards he was invited to be in the National Football League. He was invited by two teams, the Green Bay Packers and the Detroit Lions, both of which he turned down. He was apparently a very decent person all along, and he had a relationship for a while with a model by the name of Phyllis Brown, who did some modeling, and as a result, he also did some modeling. In fact, he appeared on one of the magazine covers at one time. He went to a meeting where Wendell Willkie was speaking, Wendell Willkie being one of the presidential candidates, and he went along with Phyllis Brown, the model, and he said that changed his mind from being an isolationist to more of a internationalist. His dad, he indicated to his father that he was interested in politics, and his dad told him to, why don't you go and talk to the party boss. Apparently he was in Grand Rapids, but wherever he was, and he went to the party boss and wanted to talk to him about getting in politics. The party boss kept him waiting 2 hours in the lobby, and then when he did finally get an audience with him, he only gave him about 2-3 minutes, and he was really burned up about that, and he wasn't too happy with his party boss anyway, because he was the one that was giving out patronage, and he just felt that it was not up and up. So he determined then, shortly after that meeting, that he was going to defeat him in politics. And so he and a group of his law friends decided that's exactly what they were going to do. But then the war intervened, so he went into the Navy. He won 10 battle stars, was promoted eventually to the rank of lieutenant commander, after which he went into politics, and he ran for the House of Representatives. But it was at that particular time that they also defeated the party boss, exactly what they had wanted to do. It was about this time, when he was elected to the House, that he married Betty Ford, who was also a part-time model at that particular time. Gerald Ford, although he was very low-key, was ambitious. And the one thing that he wanted, he didn't want presidency. What he wanted was to become the Speaker of the House. Unfortunately for him, the Republicans were in the minority. And
this was right after World War II.
Right, and yeah, this was for a long time that they were in the minority.
40 years.
When he entered the House, the two people that he met almost immediately and became friends with both of them, one was JFK, John F. Kennedy, and the other one was Richard Nixon, and he was friendly with both of them. And he said that the two things that he remembered while he was in the House of Representatives early on, the first one was that he heard General Douglas MacArthur address the joint session of Congress, the old soldiers never die speech. The other thing that he remembered was Richard Nixon, how zealous he was in prosecuting Alger Hiss. for treason. Now, one thing about Ford, he never talked down about anybody, talked anybody down behind somebody's back, including Nixon. When a lot of people were talking about Nixon and kicking Nixon around, he did not, and Nixon never forgot that kind of a loyalty. When he went into the House of Representatives, both Nixon and John F. Kennedy were eyeing the presidency. Ford was anxious to become the Speaker of the House, and the one way that he was moving in that direction was that he was appointed to the Appropriations Committee, which is a powerful committee.
It is indeed.
Always divvying out the money.
Taking care of the money.
And shortly after that, I'm not sure what the year was, but a well-known senator from Michigan, a name that you probably remember, Vandenberg.
Sure.
Arthur Vandenberg. He died, and there were those who wanted Ford then to run for his seat. But Ford debated about that, but he said no. He preferred to stay in the House. He felt that that was where the power was, and especially the power of the money. After Kennedy's assassination, the Warren Commission was appointed, and Ford was appointed to the committee. He said he really didn't have time to serve on it, really didn't want to be on it, but he was on it. And he was the one, maybe there were others, but apparently he was one of the primary ones who said that they were not sure that Oswald had acted alone.
Acted alone, yeah.
So they never, they backed away from that no conspiracy theory and so on. Okay. The Republicans then did a study regarding the Vietnam War, and he rejected the study out of hand. Apparently, for whatever reason, he went along with the war and went along with LBJ, and many felt that that was a mistake on his part, that he so immediately out of hand dismissed that particular study. All right. He became a real foot soldier for Richard Nixon, even though he didn't approve of many of the things that Nixon did. And the one thing that Ford was noted for was his public relations. He had a knack for public relations. He went home a lot and moved along his constituents. And this was the time, I thought this was interesting, this was the time when the Polaroid camera had just been developed. And he bought a Polaroid camera, and he made certain that pictures were taken of him and his constituents. And he felt that a picture with him was worth so much, was worth a lot of votes. which he did get, so okay. In the 1968 convention, Ford's name came up to be the vice president. The only thing was, at that point, the Republicans were getting more and more people in the House of Representatives, and so he was moving closer and closer to the point of becoming the Speaker of the House. And by the way, he never became the Speaker of the House.
No, he didn't. That's true.
But he felt that they were on the way, and because of that, he turned down the whole idea of the vice president. All right, and of course, let's go on to see some more pictures. These are the pictures again from the presidential library. Nixon to announce choice. This is now, of course, the time when Nixon was about ready to be forced to retire or resign, and Nixon had to choose a vice president, and he chose Agnew after.
Of course.
Yeah, and then Agnew did not last that long.
No, he didn't.
No, okay. Nixon, when he was ruling or as president, he did not spend much time with the legislation. He ruled primarily by what is it? The presidential signing of the orders.
Executive orders.
Executive
They
orders.
ruled by executive orders.
You've heard about that lately?
I've heard a lot about that lately.
Well, apparently Nixon had a tendency to do that also, and this way he did not go to the Congress, which is exactly the thing that Ford did not like, because Ford was such a loyal congressman. So, yeah. Okay. Did we have another picture there? Yeah. Okay. Picked him as the vice president, which we know. It's interesting. There is an article in the Constitution which I brought along with me, the 25th Amendment of the Constitution. Section 2 says, whenever there is a vacancy in the office of the vice president, the president shall nominate a vice president who shall take office upon confirmation by a majority vote of both houses of Congress. That's how he became the vice president. He was unanimously chosen. Apparently he was well liked. Albert was at that time the Speaker of the House, and he proposed to Ford that he become the vice president, and that's precisely the office that Ford really wanted, but instead became the vice president. Okay. I think I'd like to move on a bit to the Watergate days. In many ways, I think Ford was sometimes a bit naive or very clever in that he did not want to know some of the things that were taking place. Because if he knew, he would have to lie about it. And Ford was not one who wanted to lie about it.
That's called plausible deniability.
Yes, so true. When the break-in took place on Watergate, Ford's reaction was that this was the stupidest thing he had ever heard, not aware at all of who did it, and certainly did not believe that the White House would be involved in it. The Attorney General of the United States then was a man by the name of Mitchell. Remember him?
John Mitchell.
John Mitchell. Remember his wife?
Yeah, she didn't really like her husband much.
No, it was kind of an interesting story. Well, we won't get into that part of it, but what I want to mention is that Ford asked Mitchell if the White House was in any way involved. And Ford said, Mitchell looked me straight in the eye and said, no way. And he believed him because Ford believed what people said, and he felt that people should believe what he said, and that was the kind of man that he was. So I think from that that standpoint, he was an admirable man.
Unlike the skepticism that is prevalent in these later years.
Yes, yes. It would be nice if we could go back to this kind of a climate. When the grand jury indicted 7 men who were involved in that Watergate break-in, Ford accepted the fact, the Republican line, that this was nothing to be concerned about. So as the vice president, what he decided to do then was to promote the Republican Party, and he did a lot of speaking going out in the country. And in the process of doing so, he obviously was also defending Richard Nixon. Maybe not intentionally, but he was by his various statements. And then when Nixon's had that attitude of forgetting about the party and so on, he talked to his wife about giving up politics completely and leaving Washington. And he really wanted to leave in January of 1977, but of course none of that worked out. When finally the tapes came out, Ford said he didn't want to hear the tapes, and it wasn't until finally the tape came out that had that 18.5-minute gap that he really became aware of the fact that Nixon was very much involved in this. And finally he said, up until then he had been kind of promoting Nixon, but he looked very foolish in doing so. And at that point he said that he could no longer promote and stand behind Nixon. And so, and that tape came out on the 5th of August. Haig, remember him, General Haig? He was a take charge type of a guy. He said that Nixon could pardon himself, or he said the vice president could pardon him. And Ford maintained that there was never a deal made to pardon him. Not many people believed that at the time. And when Ford became president, when Nixon resigned, he said he felt sorry for his friend, and he was not gloating about the fact that he was now president. He took seriously what Thomas Jefferson had said, and the quotation is, and Jefferson said, "The second office of the government is honorable and easy. The first is but a splendid misery." And he's not the only person who's talked this way about the vice presidency and the presidency. So, okay. Nixon's style of leadership had been to barricade himself in the office. Ford's style had been entirely different. He was open. He was candid about what he was going to do and what he wanted to do. And everything changed in the top administration when Ford took over, except the cabinet. He took the cabinet, kept the cabinet for a while because of, in order to show continuity. Then, and by the way, Ford was rating very high in all the polls until he announced that he was going to give a pardon. And until then, he had been so well received. And on Sunday, September 8, 1974, he told the nation that he was going to give a pardon to Nixon. Many said that this was a secret and dirty deal that had taken place. 50% of the public disapproved of what Ford was doing. And pardon actually was bad politics. The Gallup poll dropped from 71% to 50% in just a matter of a few days. They said that Ford was suffering from some very low spirits at the time, and it was not because of the pardon, but because of his wife's cancer. And this was a thing that really affected him. And by the way, I'll mention something about Betty Ford. When he ran for office on his own, she was right out there in the front, and people liked her very much. But when she was on 60 Minutes, she made some statements that really the conservatives did not like. There were several comments that she made. One of them was that she would not be at all surprised if her children had tried pot. Also said that, you know, their daughter Susan, she said she's a typical teenager. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if she tries premarital sex. And then the other thing that she said was that the Supreme Court ruling regarding abortion she thought was the right one, and the conservatives really turned against her on that. And it did hurt him as far as getting votes for the re-election. But when Ford became president, he chose Nelson Rockefeller as his vice president. And this was certainly part of the Liberal Party. But they said that not only did he kind of bring along with him the liberal part of the party, but also a lot of Democrats seemed to be very much in favor of Ford and what he was doing. In order to kind of shake up the White House, he promoted General Haig to become the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, and that was one way of getting rid of him. He brought in a man whose name I think is well known to us now, Dick Cheney. He brought him into the White House. Ford said he knew nothing at all about the things that had been taking place regarding the CIA and the anti-war list and so on. And he said he knew nothing at all about the FBI bugging Martin Luther King's telephone and so on. So So he distanced himself from that.
He distanced himself. That's
Yeah,
right.
and said that's not the way he was going to run his administration, and apparently didn't. Now, he was, no question about it, Ford was a Cold War hawk. He was conservative and so on, but he kind of changed after he was in the White House. One of the things he did, he gave amnesty to the draft dodgers.
2 minutes.
And also, that hurt him. He also extended the SALT Treaty in 1972, and let me quickly go through a couple of things that he did.
Yeah, while he was president. Yeah.
Yes, while he was president. During this time, the unemployment went way down. The unemployment rate was 6.5%. And inflation was really rampant. And remember the win button, W-I-N buttons?
Yes.
He did that, but people kind of laughed about that. And he didn't get any cooperation from the Democrats. The one thing he did, several things he did, but the one thing he did, he said, as far as the war in Vietnam is concerned, it's over. He declared it the end. And a lot of people didn't like that because, we didn't win. But he said it's better to just stop and say it's over. And that was more than any of the elected presidents had been able to do before that. Two things he did. They felt he looked a little weak because of that amnesty and declaring the war being over. But about that time, Cambodia conquered one of our merchant ships. And with diplomacy, he got that back. The other thing he did was the Helsinki Accord, which took place in Finland, and many historians feel that was really the end of the Soviet Union because of the Helsinki Accord and the human rights thing, which Carter later on capitalized on that. Mm-hmm. Well, I will end at this particular point,
okay.
Unless you have some
Well,
questions.
I just want, isn't he the only person that didn't get elected to
Yep.
either the White House, either to the vice presidency
Yeah, the only
or the
one.
presidency?
Vice president.
The reason I'm bringing that up is I heard it on Jeopardy recently.
Oh, okay.
Who was the only?
You could have heard it here.
Who I could have waited until I got here.
Yeah.
Well, and we are just about out of time.
All right.
Glenn,
But he lost the election, of course, primarily because of the pardon and pulling
Yeah.
out of the Vietnam War and the amnesty and the Helsinki trip.
Yeah, unfortunately, this very peaceful man ended up making a lot of enemies.
Yeah, he did. He did.
And ruined his own career.
Yeah, well, but I think he would have said right along, he did what was best for the country. That was his.
Well, he did say that.
Yeah.
It's been really informative and to hear about him again. And we hope that our audience has learned a few things
We
about
hope so.
him.
Yeah.
Or refresh their memory about
Yeah.
him.
Well, many of
because
us
he
lived
is
through-
within our memory.
Many of us lived through that.
Yes,
Yeah.
of course. Yeah.
Could or could not have maybe voted for him or didn't vote for him, but were of the age to do so.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, of course. Thank you, Len,
Yeah.
very much.
Yeah.
And we're going to do some other things about presidents as the year goes on.
Yeah.
So stay tuned for
Okay.
anything Len is going to do.